Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Kevin Zwicker from Fast Count coming at you. And before I get into this post show, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe. This was one of those nights where I really feel as if you're somebody who is very pro AEW or very anti AEW. You're gonna have mixed opinions, right? This was a show that featured a majority of the matches dealing with bloodshed, right? And coming off of Blood and Guts last week, you really, think that that's probably the most violent, night of the year for AEW. And it feels as if they tried to top that tonight with the amount of blood and gore that was involved in the show. And for me personally, I'm not a guy who really gets too squeamish when it comes to blood and violence in my wrestling. I think there's some spots where they go pretty overboard. When you had that steel cage match with Swerve and Hangman Page, and you had the syringe in the mouth, and on the blood and guts match where you saw the plate of glass being thrown. But for the most part, it's professional wrestling. It's inherently violent. And tonight, just like Salty Grampy just said, we saw the return of Swerve Strickland. And most shockingly than the return of Swerve Strickland, we got a new AEW World Champion crowned in Samoa Joe. Now, just by reading the tea leaves and kind of fantasy booking and coming to logical conclusions, I kind of figured that the direction that we were going to go to was we're going to have Hangman Page eventually drop the title to MJF when he comes back. I thought that made the most logical sense. I think the fact that they already have this history and already have this groundswell of stories laid out, and MJF being the guy who I think, especially with him having the contract, I thought he would be the most logical person to have the title, taking it away from Hangman Page. But we got Samoa Joe winning the AEW World Championship in a brutal affair. I just like I said to start off the show, there was multiple matches where we saw blood involved, but Samoa Joe, very reminiscent to those images of John Cena back in the day at Judgment Day in his I Quit match against JBL, where the guy was just covered in blood. It was very similar tonight where what we saw with Samoa Joe. And we got Samoa Joe winning the AEW Championship with the help of Hook. Hook turning heel, rejoining the Ops, revealing that he had the Ops shirt. And as soon as the show looked to be going off, we saw the fact that Swerve Strickland, yes, Swerve's house, one of the biggest stars in AEW, made his heroic return. And now the direction seems to be clear. We're heading towards Samoa Joe versus Swerve Strickland. And if you guys remember, the person to take out Samoa Joe was Okada. So for me, if Swerve was going to come back, you would think that he would want to get some revenge on Okada and try to enter the Continental Classic to get back with Okada. But it looks as if we're pivoting from that, and we took the Men in Black Neuralizer, and we are pivoting to Samoa Joe and Swerve Strickland. Carson, what's going on, buddy? I thought the Hurt Syndicate laying down for like 20 minutes during the Casino Gauntlet was ridiculous. Also, Hook looks like a 14-year-old kid who's never been to the gym. We're supposed to believe this guy is a threat in the ring. The Lucha Bros are back into. Yeah, just before I got on, I saw that the Lucha Bros were back. I know that you're a big Lucha Bros fan. Hook, I remember Hook's debut match in AEW, and I happened to be at the show that night. And the guy was over like Rover, right? Before he even was able to get into the ring, people were chanting Hook's name. People were excited to see this guy, and people were blown away by that match. Hook, to me, obviously he has that look of a guy who, handsome guy, has the genes of Taz. So, and also if you look back at his athletic pedigree, he's somebody who, is a very accomplished lacrosse player. So he's a legitimate athlete. But you're right, Hook isn't the biggest guy in an industry where, the bigger the better Hook doesn't necessarily look that way, especially when you line him up against, with the other ops guys, right? Joe and Hobbs and even Shibata. It looks as if Hook is it's obvious that he's not a guy who's looks the part with them, but I'm not the hugest hook guy, but I don't hate him like other people do. It's more so as he goes on in this career, I'm willing to give him a chance. Don't want to be a complainer though. I like the show. I thought this was a solid show too. I don't think that this was AEW's best pay-per-view, but I also don't think it's worse. I think that goes to World's End, not last year, but probably 2023. That's probably their worst pay-per-view that they've ever done. But there's a lot to unpack with this show. And it really feels as if that tonight was a show to where they're really kind of doing a reset with a lot of different storylines, right? We got the announcement that Takeshita is going to be in the Continental Classic. We saw Kyle Fletcher lose his championship to Mark Briscoe and throw his name into the Continental Classic. Okada, as the reigning winner of the Continental Classic, he's going to have to defend his crown, going up against possibly two other members of the Don Callis family. And I think that the way that the storyline is going, I think that is shaping up that we're going to get a final between Takeshita and Okada. A much anticipated match that people are really looking forward to seeing. And I think that that's going to be the spot where we see Takeshita get the better of Okada. Because if you've been seeing and paying attention to the dynamic between the two guys, it really feels as if Okada has been little broing Takeshita throughout this whole storyline that they've been having. Even though Takeshita is the IWGP champion, I think that that'd be the perfect opportunity to really let Takeshita get his get back and establish him as one of the guys who are kind of in the upper echelon of the main event scene. We also saw a reunion of the Elite, right? We saw a few months ago, the Bucks, they did an interview. I don't remember if it was with SI or if it was with Bleacher Report, but they went on to talk about how, they're kind of on the back nine of their career, and they don't necessarily know how many more opportunities that they're going to get to team up with Kenny Omega, right? Kenny Omega is somebody who, from the very start of AEW, has missed big chunks of time due to injuries. That his battle, obviously he has that big battle with the diverticulitis that sidelined him for over a year. That was something that was kind of totally out of his control. But we know that Kenny Omega isn't a guy who's in the best physical condition, right? It's unfortunate. He's one of the guys who I consider to be one of the better, in-ring wrestlers throughout the history of the industry. It just kind of sucks that right now it feels as if we're at a point where this isn't Kenny Omega who's at 100% of his powers. It feels more so like a Kenny Omega who's at 75%, maybe even 70%. But Kenny Omega that's at 70, 75%, I think that's better than 95% of wrestlers. So I don't think it's too bad, but we're now at the direction where we're seeing the Bucks and Kenny Omega realigned. We saw Mercedes Moné take her second L in AEW, which was necessary. You guys can see in the back, I'm a humongous Mercedes mark. I think that she's the GOAT, but logically speaking, with Mercedes having all these different championships and all these different territories, I don't think it would have made sense for her to win the AEW Women's Championship right now, because at one point, I think we all know that there's going to get to a point in time where she's going to have to start dropping some of these belts back to these smaller promotions. And I don't think it's a good look to have your AEW Women's Champion dropping, all these titles all willy-nilly, all around the world, right? So I think it makes a lot more sense for her to finally win the championship once she's done dropping all these belts, in these other promotions. The Death Riders. This was a show that was fully loaded with the Death Riders, especially during the Casino Gauntlet, which, guys, I am a unapologetic Ricochet fan. I'm a huge fan of Richard O'Shea. when he initially, signed to WWE, I thought, man, this is going to be a slam dunk signing for these guys. I know that for years they have been looking for the heir apparent for Rey Mysterio when it comes to the high flyers, and it comes to Latino superstars, which I know Ricochet is not a Latino superstar, but it's clear that he's a high flyer, and it feels as if any single time that they try to crown this new heir apparent to Rey Mysterio, it flames out. And when Ricochet was in NXT, I thought, man, they're doing it right. This is a guy who is going to be in WWE for a long time. And got to the main roster, looked promising at certain points. Ultimately, it didn't work out. And ever since he's joined AEW, I think that the guy has really been able to carve a nice niche for himself, do some of the better character work of his whole career, because that's always been the knock against Ricochet. The fact that he's able to go out there and put on some quality matches, if that's the type of style of wrestling that you like. But the guy was somebody who clearly wasn't comfortable on the mic, and he has been able to carve out a nice little role for him in AEW, and being the first guy to win the national championship in AEW. I think that shows that Tony Khan and the other creative minds in AEW see that Ricochet is fit just based off of the work that he has done so far to be the first ever national champion. Let me get back to the comment section. What's going on, Tyler? You doing all right? Man, Tyler, man, I got to stop including the Chiefs on the money line in my parlays. You guys have been screwing me the last couple of weeks, man. Busting those parlays that I've been having. I need to stop gambling. Kenny looks like he has aged 10 years in the last 2. Man. Kenny is my guy. I hope that he's able to. It's unfortunate, right? Because it really is unfortunate, because I think when you picture AEW, at least for me, and you say, hey, who are the first couple of names that pop into your mind when you think of AEW? I think Kenny Omega is on the short list of names. And it's unfortunate that he's a guy who previously, before AEW even started, was somebody who kind of felt like a myth if you weren't somebody who was tuned into New Japan. You heard all these rumors or you hear all these things about Kenny Omega being this great wrestler, his feuds with Okada. And for a lot of people, AEW might have been their first exposure to Kenny Omega on a weekly basis. And for him to happen to miss all this time period due to unfortunate circumstances, there's probably people out here that don't understand the hype, because they only have been exposed to him in AEW, and they've only been able to see him in a limited basis because he's been gone for so long. And it's just like, man, this is a guy who, and I know I get a lot of shit when I say this to certain people, and wrestling's subjective. There's probably a bunch of people who've seen my channel that either think I'm 100% right on a lot of things, or I'm 100% wrong on a lot of things, or maybe somewhere in the middle. But I consider Kenny Omega to be the best in-ring wrestler of all time. Shawn Michaels was my benchmark. When anybody asked me previously, say, who do you think is the best in-ring wrestler of all time? Shawn Michaels was always my go-to guy. But after his match with Gabe Kidd at Wrestle Kingdom, Kenny Omega, at least to me, supplanted him. I know that you guys probably won't agree, and that's fine. And that's why wrestling is subjective, and that's why I love it so much. I can't wait until GCW. Man, it's unfortunate. Nick's in treatment, right? That's why he's not around. Addiction is such a thing that affects so many different people. Whether it's you personally dealing with it or around you, I feel like it's an issue that people always deal with. Tyler, did you see today earlier that promo with Joey Janela and Gail Kim? People didn't really like that. Breaking news is that MLW Fusion is coming to 2026. Bob Backlund and Bruno have entered the chat. Bob Backlund and Let me not even do that. I was gonna say it kind of a look, when Bob Backlund and Bruno, San Martino were wrestling, like a superplex was like, holy shit, like mind blowing. Now somebody do a superplex now, it's just like, it's a regular move. So different time period, different styles. Let me not disrespect Bob and Bruno, RIP, but a little bit before my time. Okay, let's just say that, guys. Please remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. Hitting the like button does really help. It helps spread the word. If you guys don't know, I saw that. I saw that. GC, I don't enjoy that. Oh man, I think next month is the last DPW show. You guys ever check out Deadlock? Deadlock is actually in my backyard, man. It's not too far from where I live, so I might pull up to the show. I think I should. Indie wrestling is an interesting beast, isn't it? It's such an interesting beast. When you go to a WWE show, it feels as if I had to equate it to anything, it kind of feels like you being into a Marvel movie, because WWE their production is so so elite, and their video packages and stuff like that. And AEW, they kind of have their own thing as well. Oh, the screen go black. Did you hear Prestige Wrestling? Yes. Yeah, I do. I also have a friend. They're going out of business. Yeah, man, that sucks. I heard about it, man. It's unfortunate. What's so unfortunate, with indie wrestling at the moment, it feels as if, with the two major companies, WWE and AEW, it feels as if the indies really can't thrive previously, because anytime they get somebody, unless it's like a Matt Cardona or a Joey Janela, where it's obvious that like those other like when they WWE and AEW don't want them anymore, it really feels as if it's hard to really just make an impact on the indies right now, unless you're somebody who previously worked for like an AEW or WWE. If you have any local indies around, or there's an indie show that you can pop up into, I highly recommend that you go to it. It's interesting and it's affordable for the most part. I don't know if you guys, check the pricing for John Cena's last match. I was curious. I already knew that there was no way I was going to be able to go. And it is about $500 to sit in the Sting section. That's what I usually call the nosebleeds, the Sting section. $500 to be up there with Sting. So if that's something that you're not looking to spend, Indies is a affordable alternative. But I'm interested to see now with Swerve coming back and Samoa Joe now having the championship. Are they just going to use Samoa Joe as a transitional champion to get the title back on Swerve? Do they plan on having MJF, be the guy lurking in the background, and him being the guy who eventually is the person who's going to challenge Swerve coming out of there? If you noticed at the end of the show, you had Hangman and Swerve Strickland standing side by side. We all know the history that they have together. They were able to settle their differences and be on the same page going into All In, to take out the Death Riders. Another interesting story now coming out of this show is we had Kyle O'Reilly tap out Jon Moxley again. Jon Moxley tapping out at All In, tapping out at Blood and Guts, saying I quit to Darby Allin at Wrestle Dream, and now tonight tapping out to Kyle O'Reilly again. That tells me two things. That tells me Jon Moxley must really like Kyle O'Reilly and is doing his best to try to make something out of him by legitimizing him twice, by tapping out to him twice in a row. or the Death Riders are soon to be reimagined with the John Moxley being out of the picture. And I think that makes the most sense, with Mox tapping out, all these times, in a short amount of in a short period. Because with the Death Riders now, just think about this from a logical standpoint. You have a guy who has, tapped out multiple times, and he's our leader at this moment. How are we going to be able to allow ourselves to be led by a guy who has tapped out so many different times? And it's interesting. It's interesting. I think that they're probably going to go with Pac being the guy who's going to lead the Death Riders, because if you noticed, out of all the individuals, he seems to be the most ruthless. But for me, I think it'd be a more interesting thing to have Marina be the leader. Marina, being the badass, strong female that she is, leading these group of guys. I think that'd be more of a different, interesting dynamic. I'll tell you a story. I was at Blood and Guts last week, and I was on the floor, had aisle seats, all of the entrances of where the Death Riders were able to come out of. I was right there. And when Hangman and Will Hobbs were brawling, I was right there. So Hangman walks by me, I touched him. Sorry, I had to do it. And I was giddy like a schoolgirl. John Moxley walks by me, I touched him. Again, giddy like a schoolgirl. Marina walks by me, don't touch her at all. One, because she's a female, and I think that, you should be a gentleman and not touch them. And two, she said multiple times, don't fucking touch me. And three, she is a trained MMA fighter. So out of all of those individuals that walked by me, she was the more likely one to kick my ass. Now, Hangman and Mox probably could have done the same thing as well, but I was scared of Marina more than them. Well, I guess I'm looking for volunteer work for pro wrestling near where I live. I sent emails to them and everything next year. I need to learn how editing and everything. Honestly, dude, I do editing. That's my side business. Outside of the content that you see me on screen, I do editing for content creators on the side. That's something I get paid to do. Got a couple of different clients in a couple of different fields for my Rolodex. So if you look at the description in my in the channel, that's my email, man. Feel free to hit me up on my email. We can talk about editing. If if there's some tips that you want to learn about some stuff, I can let you know. Plus, dude, ChatGPT will tell you everything. They'll tell you step by step exactly like how you want to do stuff. But I do editing for Robin Lundberg. Robin Lundberg, who is probably the biggest WNBA content creator in the space. Also, he does the SmackDown post show with Denise Salcedo on her channel. I do editing for Jake Asman. Jake Asman, who is probably the biggest New York Jets content creator in the space, and some other people too. But those are the two most high profile names I do. So just feel free to hit the email. But with Swerve back, I think that this really is going to re-energize the product, right? Will Ospreay, unfortunately, seems to be a long ways away from coming back, and you would expect that with somebody who's dealing with a neck injury. Another topic that is kind of floating in the air now. This is AEW related adjacent. And I'm kind of interested to see, what do you guys think about this? We saw on SmackDown, or was it? I don't remember if it was on SmackDown or if it just came out, that Sheamus isn't medically cleared to continue in the Time Is Now tournament. To determine who's going to be John Cena's last opponent, and we know that Chris Jericho's contract is running out relatively soon. Now, we don't know if it's today. We don't know if it's next week. We don't know if it's next month after John Cena's retirement tour. But I think that the rumbling is getting louder and louder of Chris Jericho leaving AEW to go to WWE. You saw Tony Khan do an interview with Ariel Helwani on his channel, which I thought was probably the best he's looked in a while. Tony, when it comes to answering these questions. A lot of times, if you've seen, especially in the beginning of AEW, the guy didn't seem to be that media trained. He talked as if me and you were doing these interviews, but it seems as if he's been able to, hunker down and spend some time learning how to properly navigate these situations. And he made it clear during that interview that he wanted Chris Jericho back in AEW. And I believe that he said on the media call that he did for Full Gear that he wanted Chris Jericho's last match to be in AEW. And for me, Chris Jericho really feels as if he is currently in the same situation that Cody Rhodes was in prior to him leaving AEW, where it feels as if he's been completely rejected by the fan base. I think that Chris Jericho has done everything that there is to do in AEW. I think that he is probably one of the more important figures in AEW short history so far, especially in the beginning of the days, because Chris Jericho was probably the most recognizable name that was on the AEW roster in the initial beginning. I think that having somebody like Chris Jericho being signed on with AEW added legitimacy. I think that him being the first ever AEW world champion, I think that was very significant in the history of the company as well. I think that if there was an AEW Hall of Fame, which eventually I feel is that's inevitable, I feel like he's one of those guys who should be in one of the first classes of it. So I've appreciated every single thing that Chris Jericho has done for AEW, and I don't think that it's been 100% bad. I think that especially in the beginning, there was a lot of good with Chris Jericho in AEW, but now it feels as if the fans have rejected him and there's nothing else for him to do. And I think that with him being in the stage of his career that he's currently in, I think that this is the last time for him to really cash in and do something as interesting as he possibly can. And there's kind of two options, right? You go to AEW, which I'm sure that they would probably pay him either very close, more, or the same amount that WWE would do. Or you could go to WWE. And personally, man, I know people that they go and they do these debates. Chris Jericho is somebody who has, over the years, somebody who's very known for being somebody who can reinvent themselves and do something new. It is very much so, a person who has his thumb on the pulse. But I think if he's going to sign to WWE, I think that they're signing him to do the hits. I think that if they were going to sign him, they don't want Judas. I don't think that they want anything that's similar to, the Learning Tree or Le Champion or any of these things. I think that if they're signing Chris Jericho, I think that they want him to do lists. I think they want him to come out to break the walls. I think that that's all that they want. I think that that's what they want. And because you got to think about this as well, there's a good chunk of WWE fans who don't watch AEW. Now, I know that there's a lot of people, maybe not a lot, there's an amount of people who are like me who watch both, right? But the percentages I don't think is as high as we think, being in this internet bubble. And I think that that's what they would want. I think they would want him to do the hits. I think that they'd want him to, give him the WWE Hall of Fame induction. I think you'd want to see him wrestle the younger guys like Rey Mysterio, Dominic Mysterio, stuff like that. So it's an interesting predicament for him because I think in AEW they would give him the freedom to try new things while WWE is going to want the hits. But it's an interesting predicament that he's going to be in, and I think that he is going to go back to WWE if I had to put some money on it. Because if you paid attention to any of the appearances that he's made recently, he's dropped a ton of weight. He's got a six-pack again. I don't think that he's getting in this shape, this really good shape to go back to do the Learning Tree stuff. That's just my personal opinion. Jericho would be doing all these break the walls. You just made the list. Yeah, I think that's what they would want. I think that's what they would want. If you watch the show, 4 out of the last 5 matches had somebody bleeding. This was a bloody affair. I think that the match that I think most people are going to, I think the images that most people are going to come out of this show is the images of Samoa Joe. And prior to that match, I was thinking that the match between Kyle Fletcher and Mark Briscoe was what everybody was going to be talking about, especially with all the spots with the tacks and the barbed wire and all of that. But Kyle Fletcher, no longer the TNT champion. I think it's a minor step back for a major comeback. I think that they have major plans for Kyle Fletcher. I think out of all the guys in AEW, I think he's the most clear-cut individual who's set up to be in the upper echelon of the main event scene much sooner rather than later, especially with him being in the Continental Classic now. I said it earlier, I think the clear direction for that is, Takeshita versus Okada in the finals. But when you have somebody like Kyle Fletcher, who's been so impressive, especially as of late, it's never a guarantee that he's completely out of it. Big Cass is missing Jericho. Big Cass. They're friends in real life, I think. I think Jericho was the one who helped get Big Cass a job in AEW in the first place. Look, Jericho, he gets a lot of shit, especially as of late for his run at AEW. I know a lot of people kind of call him like a clout vampire, for seeing any young, promising star and immediately wanting to be in a feud with him and just, suck the life out of him. But he tried, right? With the inner circle, he tried. They tried. Think about the guys who are in the inner circle, right? Santana and Ortiz. Santana has gone on to become the TNA champion. He just dropped it to Frankie Kazarian, which was freaking mind-blowing by TNA. Anytime that they get some type of freaking momentum, they find a way to squander it. But he's somebody who wasn't AEW, but he's somebody who's found success. Sammy Guevara has found levels of success. He seems to be somebody who kind of gets in his own way. But I don't know, man. We'll see. We'll see. If I was a betting man, like I said, I believe Jericho's going to go to WWE. But we now have a new world champion. We now have a new crowned national champion in Ricochet. We have Chris Statlander retaining. We have a plus. Oh, also, I forgot to mention this earlier. We got a new crowned AEW tag team champions in FTR. Brodito, great run. You never really see. Well, you usually don't see these Frankenstein teams, be able to garner much success. Every once in a while, you'll get like a Tyson Kidd and a Cesaro, or you'll get these different matchups that every once in a while you kind of strike lightning in a bottle. But Brodito, man, they had a good run with FTR being the AEW champions, the AEW tag team champions. Now I think it's pretty obvious the direction that we are heading with that. I think that what we are getting is we're going to see, once he's done filming, the return of Adam Copeland and Christian to be the ones to take the AEW tag team titles off of FTR. These were the two guys who were feuding with Cope and Christian prior to Cope leaving to go filming. I think that it's inevitable that we're going to get Cope and Christian being the AEW World Tag Team Champions. Tony has a soft spot for that era of wrestling. If you guys remember, the Hardy Boys were strongly rumored to be able to be the ones to win the AEW Tag Team Champions. When they were in AEW, unfortunately, just Demons got the best of them, and they weren't able to do that. But you know that Tony wants to give these two Canadians the tag titles. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. So I think now the direction is much clearer. With the tag titles now, Tony Storm and Mina, they were able to win the four-way, for their to continue their journey in the AEW Women's Tag Team Tournament. They're going to be able to pick the stipulations for their match against Megan Bayne and Marina. I'm sure that's going to be some violent shit, right? We're going to get more answers on AEW Dynamite on Wednesday. And guys, on Monday, we will be back to doing the Raw post shows for the most part. It's kind of been hit or miss the last couple of weeks. A lot of busy stuff with my editing business, so I haven't been able to do these as much as I possibly can, but we're going to try to get back to doing this on a continuously weekly basis. Next weekend is Survivor Series, so we'll be doing a post show for that as well. So be on the lookout. Guys, it is late. I am tired. We're going to wrap this thing up real quick. Please remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. Like I said, it helps the channel out in more ways than you even know, guys. Good night, sweet dreams, and go Jets. I am Kevin Zwicker. I'm out.